Good afternoon on today's Angry Bulletin. We're gonna get to the bottom of it, dadgummit. Whatever the truth may be, we're done with the cover-up. Or so says Tim Burchett, representative from Tennessee and current leader of the UFO investigation going on in Congress. And tomorrow, in a special hearing, 3 very credible witnesses, 3 whistleblowers, so to speak, will get their opportunity to make their case to the American people and to the government. But who are these people, and can they really be trusted? And in the gladiator ring that is the present-day scientific community, Avi Loeb and his associates are being subjected to a withering barrage of criticism from the scientific community in general. All of this criticism would run risk of completely undermining Dr. Loeb's credibility if he was not the former head of the astrophysics department at Harvard University. So what about people who don't have those sorts of lofty titles? Given how quick the scientific community is to discredit people who make extraordinary claims about extraterrestrial civilizations, would an astronomer or astrophysicist without this sort of lofty title dare to venture into this controversial field? Is the current culture in the scientific community stifling bold new ideas? All of this and more coming at you on The Angry Astronaut right now. Good afternoon once again. Welcome to The Angry Astronaut. So the moment of truth has finally arrived. The U.S. Congress tomorrow is going to be holding a hearing in regards to UAPs, UFOs, whatever you want to call them, and whether or not the military has been holding back information about some sort of covert reverse engineering program that may have gotten their hands on crashed vehicles that come from a source other than a human source. These sorts of claims have always been an extraordinary thing in the past, something that very few people would take seriously, and certainly something that people wouldn't talk about in an open hearing in Congress. But tomorrow, this is all about to change. 3 UFO whistleblowers, and by the way, all 3 of them pretty credible witnesses, are poised to create a watershed moment in the history of UFO investigation. Now, of course, David Grusch is going to be testifying, and if you want more information about him, well, I have a couple of videos about his various claims linked at the end of this one. The other 2 whistleblowers who have come forward in the past, but nevertheless not under these kinds of circumstances, are both former military pilots, one of whom is Ryan Graves, a retired Navy pilot, and David Fravor, also with the U.S. Navy. Now, Ryan Graves had some very specific things to say about his particular encounters with UAPs in the past, and they go way beyond anecdotal claims of having seen something he couldn't explain, seeing unidentified objects performing impossible maneuvers, that sort of thing. Rather, it went in conjunction with a new type of military radar that had just come online at the same time as these observations were made. Therefore, if Graves is to be believed, then the military has information that verifies his claims somewhere in their archives, information confirmed by their new type of radar. However, let's have a look at some of these claims that he makes, because they are pretty remarkable. Out of one of his articles that was published in Politico magazine, I'm just going to take a few excerpts. On a clear sunny day in April of 2014, 2 FA-18s took off for an air combat training mission off the coast of Virginia. The jets, part of my Navy fighter squadron, climbed to an altitude of 12,000 and steered towards warning area W72, an exclusive block of airspace 10 miles east of Virginia Beach. All traffic into the training area goes through a single GPS point at a set altitude, almost like a doorway into a massive room where military jets can operate without running into other aircraft. Just at the moment that the two jets crossed the threshold, one of the pilots saw a dark gray cube inside of a clear sphere, motionless against the wind, fixed directly at the entry point. The jets, only 100 feet apart, zipped past the object on either side. The pilots had come so dangerously close to something they couldn't identify that they terminated the training mission immediately and returned to base. "I almost hit one of those damn things," the flight leaders told us shortly after in the pilot's ready room. We all knew exactly what he meant. Those damn things had been plaguing us for the previous 8 months. We are trained to be expert observers in identifying aircraft with our sensors and our own eyes. It's our job to know what's in our operating area. That's why in 2014, after upgrades were made to our radar system, our squadron made a startling discovery. There were unknown objects in our airspace. Initially, the objects were showing up on our newly upgraded radars, and we assumed that they were ghosts in the machine or software glitches. But then we began to correlate the radar tracks with multiple surveillance systems, including infrared sensors that detected heat signatures. Then came the hair-raising near misses that required us to take evasive action. These were no mere balloons. The unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs, accelerated at speeds of up to Mach 1. They could hold their position, appearing motionless, despite Category 4 hurricane force winds of 120 knots. They did not have any visible means of lift, control surfaces, or propulsion. In other words, nothing that resembled normal aircraft with wings, flaps, or engines. And they outlasted our fighter jets, operating continuously throughout the day. I am a formally trained engineer, but the technology they demonstrated defied my understanding. Nearly a decade later, we still don't know what they were. When I retired from the Navy in 2019, I was the first active duty pilot to come forward publicly and testify to Congress. In the years since, there has been some notable coverage of the encounters, and Congress has taken some action to force the military and intelligence agencies to do much more to get to the bottom of these mysteries. But there has not been anything near the level of public and official attention that has been paid to the recent shoot-downs of a Chinese spy balloon and 3 other unknown objects that were likely research balloons, and that's a problem. Shortly after writing this article, Mr. Graves launched the Americans for Safe Aerospace organization, which advocates for aerospace safety and national security. It also supports pilots or other aerospace professionals who are reporting UAPs. Their goal is to demand more disclosure from our public officials about this significant safety and national security problem. I think this fellow is a pretty credible witness, and if his claims indeed have some substance to them, then there have to be extensive records somewhere in the military archives confirming his claims of what was detected on radar. If this is indeed the case, this information needs to be released to independent scientists who have a high security clearance, that at least. And then those individuals can at least tell us if there is some substance to this man's claims. And of course, he's not the only one making claims like this. Commander Dave Fravor will also be making his case to Congress tomorrow, and he was a Navy pilot along with Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich in November of 2004, graduates of the Top Gun Naval Flight Program, by the way. And on November 14th, the two pilots were training with the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group about 100 miles southwest of San Diego. What they didn't know is that advanced radar on one of the ships that was part of their training group had been detecting what operators called multiple anomalous aerial vehicles over the horizon, descending 80,000 feet in less than a second. So during their training exercise, they were diverted to investigate the anomalous object. They say at first they found an area of roiling white water the size of a Boeing 737, and then they saw something strange above the water. Quote, "We saw this little white tic-tac looking object, and it's just kind of moving above the whitewater area, Fravor said. No predictable movement, no predictable trajectory, Dietrich added. And as Dietrich circled above, Fravor went down for a closer look. He said the object was about the size of his plane, with no markings, no wings, and no exhaust plumes. And as soon as Fravor tried to cut off the UAP, it accelerated so quickly that it seemed to disappear. Later on, the USS Princeton reacquired the UAP on its radar. It was approximately 60 miles away. In other words, it had to have moved at supersonic velocities to get to that kind of distance if it was indeed the same object. So tomorrow, something unprecedented is going to be happening. A potential watershed moment in the history of UFO investigation, because three very credible witnesses, people with long, unblemished careers and a great deal of respect in their field, are all going to be saying the same thing, that UFOs definitely exist, they definitely represent something that isn't manufactured by human technology, and the government definitely has at least some information that they are keeping from the public. Even if it's just radar records, the government is keeping some information from us. These records, at the very least, need to be submitted to the House Armed Services Committee for verification. And if this is done, we may get some very interesting information in the coming weeks. The Congress has the authority to order these sorts of things. Of course, the president would have to approve it as well, being commander-in-chief of the armed forces, but given the kind of pressure the Congress is likely to bring tomorrow, assuming that the information presented is compelling enough, well, let's just say that the next few weeks are likely to be very exciting indeed. But let's move on to Dr. Loeb, the Galileo project, and the investigation in the South Pacific. This is long over at this point, obviously, and at the time of this recording, 360 spherules have now been identified out of the material that was dredged up from the bottom of the ocean a few weeks ago, 7 times more than the initial count that was isolated on the Silver Star, the name of the ship that the Galileo project commissioned in order to carry out the study. However, I'm not going to cover a whole lot of their new findings. Instead, I want to talk about the reaction from the scientific community, which, to be honest, has been withering. We're not talking about a little bit of skepticism here. We're talking about outright attacks on Dr. Loeb's credibility and his integrity as a scientist. Peter Brown, for example, a meteor physicist at Western University in Ontario, points out that several percent of detected events like this one appear interstellar at first, but almost always end up chalked up to some sort of measurement error. He made a case, which by the way was accepted for publication in the Astrophysical Journal, a peer-reviewed journal by the way, demonstrating that NASA's recordings in cases like this often end up being proven untrustworthy. He believes that the fireball that Dr. Loeb investigated likely impacted at a slower speed than the recorded data suggested. Quote, if the speed was overestimated, then the object becomes more or less within the realm of what we see in terms of other bound solar system objects, unquote. Now, by way of comparison, Dr. Loeb also submitted his report about this object known as IM2 for peer review, and it was rejected, simply because it is largely believed that an object that was traveling at this kind of speed and with this kind of diameter should have burned up before it even reached the altitude that it reported to have reached. In other words, there should be no debris left over at all from this object because it was traveling so fast that it would have completely burned up. But that's the whole point, isn't it? The fact that the U.S. military believes with a 99.999% level of confidence that this object was traveling at the reported velocity and therefore did not originate within the solar system and yet still somehow managed to impact somewhere off the coast of New Guinea suggests that it was not an ordinary meteor, that it was comprised out of some material at least twice as resilient as an average nickel-iron meteor and twice as resilient as any other meteor that is reportedly impacted with our planet, at least the ones ones that are in the current catalog. Now, just to be clear, the man who was published by a peer-reviewed journal, Peter Brown, had no information about the military data whatsoever. No information that contradicted what the military was saying, because obviously this data is classified. And yet, without any tangible data, his information was still published. Whereas at the same time, Avi Loeb's claims, which once again could not include any data that could be verified because once again it's classified, well, that was not suitable for publication. Why? Both scientists didn't have tangible information to back up their claims, and yet only one of them gets published because his claims are less controversial. Steve Desch, an astrophysicist at Arizona State University, however, had much more serious things to say. Quote, "Loeb's claims are a real breakdown of the peer review process and the scientific method. What the public is seeing in Loeb is not how science works, and they shouldn't go away thinking that," unquote. Well, to be fair, Dr. Loeb tried to work through the peer review process and was rejected, rather rapidly actually, without a lot of other information. So he followed up with an investigation of the actual suspected debris path of the object, and lo and behold, found the kinds of spherules that one would expect to find in the aftermath of a meteor impact. He also tested a control area outside of the debris zone and found very few spherules. As to be expected in this case, he gathered a lot more information to support his claim, but of course his peers wouldn't accept it. So what the hell is he supposed to do? Just sit on the information forever, afraid to publish it because he's afraid of criticism? He's afraid of going against the peer review process? Or should he simply publish what he's found, say what he believes, and let people make up their own damn minds? Well, I'll tell you, I would far prefer that process to a process that suppresses knowledge that doesn't conform to the dominant paradigm, and also a process that intimidates young, emerging astronomers who are afraid of destroying their credibility before they have any sort of reputation established, and are going to investigate far less controversial topics and try to get that information published instead of following in Loeb's footsteps and putting themselves out of a job. This process sounds a whole lot more familiar to the type of process that the Catholic Church implemented during the time of Galileo in the 17th century. And by the way, this is the reason that this organization chose to call themselves the Galileo Project. Please smash that like and hit that subscribe. It's very important to the success of this channel. And also check the description for various ways to support this content. I will be broadcasting the congressional hearing tomorrow. Please feel free to join me. And as always, stay angry about space.